Israeli forces complete encirclement of Rafah in southern Gaza. Gaza Media Office warns of impending environmental disaster due to ongoing destruction of infrastructure. And foreign ministers at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum praise Egypt and Qatar for efforts in facilitating Gaza ceasefire. Israeli occupation forces have completed the encirclement of Rafah in southern Gaza as part of a broader operation to seize more territory in the occupied enclave. The military said the move is accompanied by large-scale evacuations of the civilian population. Footage released by the Israeli army showed troops moving through rubble and entering empty buildings in Rafah. Since resuming the aggression on March 18, the Israeli military have issued repeated evacuation orders to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, forcing many into increasingly limited areas along the coast. Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip climbed to over 50,900 and over 116,400 wounded. Medical sources reported that at least 21 civilians were killed and 64 others injured in Gaza within the last 24 hours as a result of the ongoing Israeli genocide in the region. The Gaza Media Office has issued a warning about an impending environmental disaster, citing the ongoing destruction of water and electricity infrastructure by Israeli forces. Over 90% of the region's water and sewage systems have been destroyed, raising concerns about a potential health and environmental crisis that could impact areas beyond Gaza. The United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Sigrid Kaag, says more than 60,000 children under the age of 5 in Gaza are currently suffering from malnutrition. Speaking on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, Kaag noted that humanitarian aid delivered by the UN during the ceasefire period successfully reached those in need. However, she warned that since mid-March, the flow of aid into Gaza has been halted, deepening the humanitarian crisis in the occupied enclave. Foreign ministers and representatives from countries at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum have praised the efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States in facilitating a ceasefire, describing these actions as crucial for advancing reconstruction in Gaza. In a joint statement issued at the conclusion of a ministerial meeting, participants urged for the unification of Gaza with the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, under the Palestinian Authority. They stressed the need for both political and financial support for the Palestinian Authority to help it fulfill its responsibilities across Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories. And for more analysis, we now move to Mark in our newsroom.
Thank you very much, Selma. Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm now joined from Cairo by the editor-in-chief of Al-Ahram newspaper, Mohammed Ezra al-Din. Thanks for being here with us. So we have these large-scale evacuations in southern Gaza. Have they been effective in mitigating civilian casualties?
Definitely. First, thank you so much for having me on Qnews. First of all, there is more than 1,000 martyrs since the beginning, since the resuming the military operations after the ceasefire ended. and these field operations in southern Gaza and in Rafah and in the Mirage corridor, also separating Khan Yunis from Rafah, is affecting the humanitarian life in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, around 90% of the infrastructure was targeted. In addition to that, the 6 weeks of no humanitarian aid access, targeting civilians and targeting medical staff, in addition to water and electricity stations, is a part of the military operations waged on unarmed civilians, which is affecting the life of the Gaza Strip and especially in southern Gaza.
Okay, and from your knowledge, what is the current state of humanitarian aid flow into Gaza?
Egypt is exerting a lot of effort in this regard, and I think there will be a breakthrough in the ceasefire matter, in addition to entering a flow of humanitarian aid. The last visit of President Macron to Egypt conveyed the Egyptian message. Since the start of this crisis, the world now feels the atrocities taking place in Gaza, especially the U.S. administration that is step by step taking back the support for the Israeli government. And according to the statements in the past few hours, there is a breakthrough soon to be seen regarding the humanitarian aid access, in addition to the possibility of reaching some kind of agreement regarding the exchange of the Israeli detainees and releasing also a number of Palestinian detainees. There will be also a meeting for the Cairo committee today, in addition to a separate meeting between the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, and the Palestinian resistance. And there is an approach or an agreement to reach the cessation of these hostilities on the Palestinian people. I think the situation is really dire in Gaza right now. The starvation war might stop in the next few days, and we're hopeful that everyone listen to the voice of reason. And we have seen the intervention by President Trump, and he expressed his will to achieve a ceasefire or to reach some kind of agreement that saves the brokership of the U.S. to prevail peace in the Middle East. The role of the U.S. declined a little, but the Egyptian efforts, in addition to the mediators' efforts, are now very effective. And what has been reported by Egypt to the international media and what has been conveyed by the last Macron visit to Egypt is undoubtable.
Okay. And let me ask you, you mentioned the dire consequences just a few moments ago. Israel's deliberately targeting Gaza's water. What would you say are the long-term consequences of that, especially when it comes to health? And surely this is against international law.
Of course, this is a genocide war, and a large portion of which is the starvation war, in addition to targeting the infrastructure facilities such as the electricity and water treatment stations, in addition to road networks, and also most residential buildings were demolished in the Gaza Strip. And therefore, it is turning the strip uninhabitable. This genocide has to stop. Fire and a sustainable flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. The international organizations and the United Nations say that it is impossible to live in the Gaza Strip right now due to the lack of food supplies and clean water. In addition to the large number of dead bodies, and with the lack of clean water and the lack of electricity, there will be a lot of health crises, and there will be outbreak of diseases and epidemics. The international community has to bear its responsibility in this regard. In addition to the US administration, Egypt has been seeking through negotiations and talks with different parties to reach an agreement to stop the bloodshed in Gaza and in the occupied territories in general.
Well, the UN has recently called for the unification of Gaza with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. How realistic is this?
It is a just request and it is realistic, but if the international community tries to go in this path, they were met by Israeli opposition. Israel has had maneuvers to stop such an attempt before, and currently we are facing a tragic situation because the Israeli leadership leading a far-right government will not allow any communication or contact between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and they are stating that very clearly. Of course, they are also ruling out any talk of a two-state solution, which is completely unjust, and there are also claims for this. The applicability of such a proposition will be pending the Israeli approval. There must be international community pressure and also US pressures. Egypt is exerting all efforts possible to sustain the Palestinian cause, and we are keen on rejecting the displacement of the Gaza population and relocating the population to anywhere else, because in case of any evacuation, whether voluntarily or forcibly, this will be the end of the Palestinian cause. The Palestinian cause will continue, and there are millions of people living on these lands, and this is an occupied land according to international norms. So the humanitarian needs must be met in accordance with the international law. Also, the calls for the two-state solution and granting Palestinians connected the land run by the Palestinian Authority or any representatives to be elected by the Palestinian people, regardless of all the parties that are not acceptable for the US and Israel, meaning the Palestinian resistance.
Now, I know we ask this question every day, but where we are right now, what do you think are the chances of achieving some kind of lasting ceasefire?
I think that there is hope, and in a few hours we will see the results of the Egyptian efforts and the US pressure on the Israeli government. In addition to the intervention of the mediators, there is now some kind of awareness on an international level regarding the necessity of entering humanitarian aid. There are many talks, but they are not yet resulting in an agreement. There are talks regarding an exchange of detainees, 8 alive and 8 dead bodies of the Israeli detainees, in exchange for 300 Palestinian prisoners or detainees. Half of them have lifetime sentences. The main attempt here or the main goal is to provide a sustainable flow of humanitarian aid, plus the ceasefire for 2 months to 70 days, and entering the second phase of the ceasefire agreement agreed upon during the past month. We cannot be pessimistic. The Israeli side is stalling and they are rejecting all kinds of pressures, whether by the US or the international community, but there is internal pressures now inside Israel by the detainees' families and the soldiers. They're refusing to go back to the war in the Gaza Strip. All of these factors might actually lead to resuming the ceasefire agreement and the start of the humanitarian aid access once again.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here on Qnews, the editor-in-chief at Al Ahram newspaper, Mohammed Ezzaldine. Thank you very much for being with us from Cairo. Now it's back to you in the studio, Selma.
Thank you, Mark, for conducting this analysis. And now we move to the latest developments in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has praised U.S. President Donald Trump for what he described as a better understanding of the Ukraine conflict than any other Western leader. Speaking at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum in southern Turkey, Lavrov emphasized that resolving the root causes of conflicts, including the Ukraine situation, is essential for lasting peace. He noted that Trump had been the first Western leader to repeatedly assert that bringing Ukraine into NATO was a huge mistake and one of the core issues fueling the conflict. Lavrov's comments came after talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff in St. Petersburg on Friday, focusing on efforts to find a peace agreement.
We have been acting the same way.
A Russian drone strike on Kyiv early Saturday injured 3 people and ignited fires at multiple warehouses, according to the city's military administration. The overnight attack lit up the capital's skies as air defense systems engaged incoming drones. Authorities confirmed 3 warehouses were set ablaze during the assault. Ukraine's Air Force reported that air defenses intercepted 56 out of 88 drones launched by Russia across the country. An additional 24 drones were diverted through electronic warfare measures. Damage was recorded in 5 regions across central, eastern, and southern Ukraine. Ukraine's foreign minister emphasized that Ukraine's NATO membership should not be off the agenda. Speaking at the Antalya Diplomatic Forum, he highlighted that Ukraine's battle-tested army would provide the cheapest possible contribution to transatlantic security. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has consistently opposed Ukraine's NATO membership, demanding limits on Ukraine's military size and claiming full control over 4 Ukrainian regions, despite not fully occupying them. With Russia controlling nearly 20% of Ukraine's territory and continuing its advances, the Kremlin insists that Ukraine should make concessions in any potential negotiations. Russia launched a barrage of drones in an overnight attack on Ukraine, injuring 3 people and causing damage to residential and commercial buildings in Kyiv. Ukrainian emergency services released footage showing a warehouse set on fire due to the attack, though the date and location of the video could not be independently verified. City officials confirmed multiple commercial buildings were ablaze. Ukraine's air defense systems successfully shot down 56 of the 88 drones launched by Russia. Additionally, 24 drones were redirected using electronic warfare, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. Ukraine's European allies have pledged more than 21 billion euros in new military aid during a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Brussels. British Defense Secretary John Healey confirmed that the agreement would see an increase in weapon deliveries to Ukraine. German Defense Minister announced that Germany would send 4 IRIS-T air defense systems and various other weapons to Ukraine. However, he rejected Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for additional Patriot systems, stating that Germany is unable to supply them at the moment as it's awaiting its own deliveries. Moving on, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said on Saturday there is a possibility of reaching a fair and honorable agreement in the ongoing nuclear talks with the United States, provided both sides approach the negotiations with an equal stance. Speaking to Iranian TV in Oman, Araghchi, who is leading Iran's delegation, confirmed that the negotiations are indirect and focus solely on the nuclear issue, emphasizing that a successful outcome requires a mutual willingness to reach an agreement based on equality. The high-level talks aim to revive negotiations over Tehran's rapidly advancing nuclear program, with U.S. President Donald Trump warning of military action if a deal is not reached. Despite the ongoing talks, Iran remains cautious, skeptical about the potential for an agreement, and wary of Trump's repeated threats to bomb Iran if it does not halt its uranium enrichment program.
با طرف‌های دیگه گفتگو نخواهیم کرد. ما با 3 کشور اروپایی در حال گفتگو هستیم. با کشورهای روسیه و چین.
Japan officially launched the highly anticipated World Expo 2025 in Osaka today with a spectacular opening ceremony blending futuristic innovation and traditional Japanese culture. The ceremony featured addresses from Emperor Naruhito and Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, along with vibrant performances that captivated the audience. In his speech, Ishiba emphasized the importance of global unity, urging nations to collaborate on technological innovation, cultural exchange, and mutual understanding. Running until October, Expo 2025 will showcase groundbreaking innovations in technology, sustainability, and international cooperation. With the theme, Designing Future Society for Our Lives, the event aims to bring together over 160 countries to tackle global challenges and co-create a better future for all. A sudden 25% U.S. import tariff on foreign-made vehicles has left thousands of European cars stranded at American ports, disrupting deliveries and intensifying global trade tensions. The new tariffs have impacted major European manufacturers whose popular models no longer meet U.S. content requirements under the USMCA trade agreement. Industry analysts say companies are now reconsidering production strategies, including the possibility of building new manufacturing plants in the United States. German businesses, particularly small and mid-sized exporters, are facing growing pressure for the latest U.S. tariff policies, according to a leading German industry official. Oliver Wilhelms, executive director of the German Chamber of Commerce in North China, warned that despite a temporary 90-day suspension of new U.S. tariffs by President Donald Trump, the uncertainty surrounding trade policy is already impacting German firms. He noted that companies exporting directly from Germany to the U.S. are among the hardest hit. Larger firms with the U.S.-based operations can offset the impact, but smaller exporters face significant disadvantages. French President Emmanuel Macron has said that Trump's 90-day suspension on tariffs gave room for only a fragile pause. He explained that it's fragile because the 25% tariffs on steel, aluminium, and automobiles and the 10% tariffs on all other products are still in place. Macron added that they requested 52 billion euros for the European Union, and that means 90 days of uncertainty for all businesses on both sides of the Atlantic and beyond. He also reaffirmed that France and the European Union would present a united front in terms of negotiations aimed at reaching a deal and getting the American tariffs removed. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Israeli forces complete encirclement of Rafah in southern Gaza. Gaza Media Office warns of impending environmental disaster due to ongoing destruction of infrastructure. And foreign ministers at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum praise Egypt and Qatar for efforts in facilitating Gaza ceasefire. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.